Hey everyone, Kyle Erickson here. It's been a bit of a wild ride since I got my hands on the iPhone 14 Pro about 5 or so months ago. At first glance, I was super excited about the new camera system, dynamic island, always on display, amongst other things, but my opinion has kind of shifted a lot since I first got this. Sometimes when there's a major change with the iPhone, it takes Apple a while to sort out the kinks. There's definitely been some of that going on with this model. There's been things added and fixed, and I've honestly been on the fence since I bought this, whether it makes sense to keep the Pro or drop down to the regular iPhone 14. Today, I want to go over a lot of my real-world usage with the 14 Pro, the highs and lows, the issues that I've come across, and some unexpected surprises that have come up specifically within the last month or two. So with that said, let's get into it. Alright, so I bought the iPhone 14 Pro as soon as it was announced. I was lucky enough to get my order in early and my device in mid-September before things started backing up. And I was really excited about it for obvious reasons. First major design change to the front display since the iPhone X was released in 2017. A new camera system, new software features. There was a lot to look forward to. I was even pumped for the new deep purple color, which is what I ended up going with. I still love the color, but one reason I think I may have been better off with silver or gold is the darker colors on the 14 Pro look dirty 99% of the time around the camera bump. Because the lenses stick out so far on the Pro combined with a glossy finish, it does seem to be a bit of a dust collector, and I do find it hard to clean at times. Having said that, it's still hands down my favorite design out of any phones released in the last 6 months or so. Visually, it's stunning, the build quality is outstanding, and it doesn't seem to scratch easily either. Now, that could be because I've had this in a case pretty much the entire time that I've owned it. I'm not brave enough to go caseless, and it seems like every time I do see someone without a case on their phone, it looks like a tractor ran over it. I've been rocking the Nomad Modern leather case from day one, which has seen a few drops and has held up really well. As far as leather cases go, these seem to be a lot more durable than the Apple branded ones. I had a Nomad case on my iPhone 12 for 2 years and it held up really well. I'll link this one in the description for anyone who is interested, but opposite the side of the case is the display, which is one of the best things about this phone. You have the 120Hz ProMotion display, so you get super smooth scrolling. I generally notice high refresh rates more on touch devices than I do things like monitors and TVs. And while I feel like I can notice smoothness in the touch feedback or motion a little more on some 120Hz Android devices, it's still amazing. And there's one thing that sets the ProMotion apart for me. The overall color saturation and accuracy on the display feel a lot more natural and accurate than on most OLED displays. What I love about having a color accurate display like this, outside of the fact that it looks great for viewing content, is when I look at something on my color calibrated monitor and move over to my iPhone, the image looks very similar, so if I'm making wallpapers, editing photos, or videos on my monitor, generally I know that they're gonna look good on my phone as well. The display is pretty much the brightest you'll find in a mobile phone with a peak brightness of 2000 nits. I've noticed this is a lot more visible outdoors than most phones, but honestly, since this came out in the fall and it's usually pretty dreary here in the wintertime, I haven't noticed it as much as I probably will in the summer when there's a little more sunshine and I'm outdoors more often. The other thing to note here is the display has an adaptive refresh rate, so you can go all the way down to 1 Hz, where the 13 Pro I believe is on the lower end at 10 Hz. That 1 Hz frequency is utilized for the always-on display exclusive to the 14 Pro, which I have had some issues with. I think there was initially some issues with power draw, and one thing that I didn't like is it always felt too alive at first. Depending on what wallpaper you had selected and if you're running in dark mode, the difference between an active and inactive state was really minor, which led me to actually turn that feature off. Now, Apple did fix up this issue eventually, allowing you to turn off showing wallpaper on the always-on display from the settings, which makes this much more usable in my opinion. And there are a couple of features within the always-on display that I love. If you have an Apple TV and you're using your iPhone as a remote, it'll utilize that 1 Hz frequency and the always-on display to show that remote at all times, which makes this a lot more convenient to use. Instead of having to unlock your iPhone every time and access an app or something for that remote, it's just always displayed on there, so it's really easy to access. It does the same thing if you're using Apple Maps, where it'll show you a navigation screen with a phone locked, and it uses less power than it would if it was open. And I generally really like the idea of utilizing that screen more at 1 Hz to conserve battery life. While Apple has put in a lot of work into that always-on display since it launched, there's still one other display-related bug that I've encountered that pops up every once in a while, and and it doesn't seem to have been fixed yet, and then there's this dead touch problem. Presumably this is also a software issue that does happen fairly intermittently, but it can be annoying at times. I've seen other people complain about the same thing as well, where you just be doing something and the phone just becomes unresponsive to touch. Usually locking the screen off and on again will solve it, but I'm pretty sure this is not a hardware issue but an iOS 16 problem, which has been a tad buggy at times. I've had some Face ID issues at times where that process would hang, specifically while using Apple Pay. That can be a little bit frustrating if people are waiting for you to pay for something. Sometimes my widgets have been blank and complications on my watch coming from my iPhone have been hit or miss at times. Most of them have either been cleared up entirely or work somewhat better with the latest update, so hopefully we see less of that stuff from now on. I don't want to be too over dramatic about those issues either. They are fairly infrequent, but they are happening more frequently than in past years, so I think it's just important to call that out. On the plus side, the dynamic island has grown on me quite a bit. I do like that with any media or live apps like maps, you're just a touch away from hopping into those apps if you need to check out an upcoming turn in a map or skip through a track. Just in regard to live or real-time functionality, I thought at this point live activities or notifications would be more prominent for things like tracking deliveries and events, but so far it seems like only a handful of apps have those features. I was really looking forward to see what that would look like, so hopefully we see that roll out into more apps in the near future. But outside of that, the final thing that I wish was a tad more beefy on the software side of things is the native camera app. This is one area that I'd actually like to see Apple follow some Android devices on and have a pro camera mode where you can adjust shutter speed, ISO, white balance, and all that good stuff. They put so much emphasis on the camera system in these Pro models, but they don't necessarily give you Pro features in that regard. I had extremely high hopes with this camera system, with Apple moving to a 48 megapixel main lens, having 4K cinematic mode, more zoom options, and action mode to a lesser extent. I'll say the biggest thing that I personally notice on the main camera sensor is you do get a little more depth of field than you do on the iPhone 13 Pro without any kind of software adjusted blur, but outside of that, there really isn't a ton of difference between the 13 Pro and the 14. I do use the telephoto lens pretty frequently, which is honestly the biggest reason that I keep the Pro over the regular 14. It's great that it has ProRes video recording and it can shoot raw photos, but I find the regular video modes and photos look great most of the time without having to use those options. Usually I like the way that the photos look out of the gate. I might stylize them or edit them a bit, but they don't really need enough adjustment for me to even consider shooting raw. And on the video end of things, I'll often throw the phone on cinematic mode in 4K 24 for the occasional B-roll clip for a video that I'm working on, or if I'm out on a hike somewhere. Part of why I got the Pro this year was because I didn't want to drag my camera around with me everywhere that I go. I spent so much time filming these videos and using my Sony a7 IV for content that it can feel like a bit of a pain to bring around with me everywhere, so having a good 3-lens array like this in the 14 Pro allows me to grab some pretty nice shots and still keep things light and fun. Things like action mode seem kind of gimmicky at this point. Maybe that will change when I start filming myself running or doing parkour or something. But for the most part, I think that you can ignore that feature and a lot of the marketing material around the Photonic engine. All things considered, it's a really great camera system, probably still the best out there when you combine photo and video. I don't have any issues with shutter lag, and for the average person, this is probably more than you need in terms of overall camera quality. Just the fact that it can record in all these different formats and shoot in ProRes, even if it's only at 1080p, is a testament to how powerful this phone is, and that's where someone like me is going to notice the performance aspect the most, but overall, I don't have a lot to report on performance-wise. If you've got an iPhone within the last 2 or 3 years, you're pretty much going to be able to do anything that you want, from recording video to playing games or watching content. Everything will usually be very snappy with no lag whatsoever, but if you do really care about benchmarks, I did just run one on the newly released version 6 of Geekbench, which is supposed to better reflect modern usability and workflows than the previous version. It still crushes pretty much any other phone, and in my opinion, it's not something that we really need to worry about. I'd say the biggest thing related to performance that we need to be concerned with is battery life. Like I touched on before, in the early days of iOS 16 with this phone, I found it did tend to suck back power a lot more than with previous models. Still, battery life isn't the greatest. I find myself on low battery a lot more than I do with most other phones, and I do have to put this on the charger a lot more frequently than I'd like. There was a lot of publicity around battery life tied to the always-on display, but really it's much more about how iOS 16 actually works. With iOS 16, especially on the 14 Pro, there's a lot more background processes running. Things like fitness goals, spotlight search, lock screen widgets, all those contribute to battery draw. And I've noticed the more of that stuff that you have on, the quicker that the battery drains. So if you're someone who's feeling things draining faster than you'd like, you could try turning some of that stuff off. I've also seen some folks post pictures of their battery capacity, and somehow they've got it down to like 93% capacity over a 5-month window. That's obviously a lot faster than you like to see this far in, but in my case, it's still sitting at 100%. And I'm wondering if that might be due to different parts, or maybe how people are charging their iPhones. I've actually never plugged this phone in. It's always been charged on MagSafe through the Nomad Base 1 Max charger. And if I could give anyone advice on how to charge your iPhone, MagSafe is definitely my personal favorite. Historically, I've always charged my phone wirelessly when available. I just find that my battery capacity does seem to extend longer than if I were to plug it in all the time. But MagSafe not only charges faster than a regular wireless charger, but because it snaps into place, you don't have issues that you occasionally do on standard wireless chargers where you think it's charging, but it's actually not. I've stuck with a Base 1 Max charger specifically because I can throw on my Apple Watch or my AirPods at the same time, and it's nice and heavy so it doesn't move around on you. But these are pretty pricey, so I will leave a couple other options in the description for anyone who's looking for something decent that's a little bit cheaper. The real crime when it comes to charging is that Apple still is only charging at 20 watts when there are loads and loads of phones out there that are offering anything from 40 watts all the way up to 90 and above, which I'm hoping gets a bump in the next release, but who knows. I know there might be a little bit more of a negative sentiment here, but in all honesty, the iPhone 14 Pro has been great for me. I've thought about moving down to the regular 14 a lot. There's a lot of overlap in what I actually use my phone for, and I do really miss how light the regular is over the Pro. The only things keeping me from making that switch are the display and the brightness and the always-on features and the extra camera lens. If you're someone who's shopping for a phone and you don't care about those things as much, I think the regular iPhone 14 is more than good enough for most people. It's no slouch either, and while things like the display aren't as good as in the Pro, it's still really nice. For me, the big question out of all of this is iOS. I don't have any concerns with the hardware, but one thing that Apple has historically done well is keeping things simple on the software side of things and making sure that they're done well. Reflecting on the last 5 months or so, I can't help but wonder if they've spread themselves thin with a lot of these new features, and maybe if it's harder for them to add the level of polish that they've been able to in the past. Or maybe these are just temporary growing pains, and this will be smoother sailing in the future. It's kind of been a weird experience dealing with more bugs this year than in years past. Having said that, I'd love to know, how's everyone else's iOS 16 experience been? Are you having any issues with other devices? And if you're on an iPhone 14 Pro, how are you liking it? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, and if you want to see more tech-related content, or if you want to help me write a screenplay for the sequel to Snakes on a Plane, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next upload.